They built 96 luxury homes on land they didn't even own. I remember the first time I drove down that mountain road. Brand new roofs shimmered under the Colorado sun, driveways lined with fresh concrete, and crisp white fences framed every perfectly manicured lawn. It looked like a postcard, but every nail, every brick, every blade of sod was planted on my family's land. They thought the old survey records had vanished. They thought the deed was lost to time. They thought they could bury history under cement and HOA bylaws. For 6 months, they poured millions into their perfect community. They sold homes, held ribbon cuttings, paraded new homeowners through model houses. HOA Karen, the president, stood center stage at every groundbreaking, barking orders like she was the queen of the valley. The arrogance was breathtaking, but I stayed quiet. I watched from the edge of my property as they raised their little empire, inch by inch. Not one of them knew about the ledger in my grandfather's attic. Not one of them had seen the single document that would bring their entire kingdom down. Imagine buying your dream home, throwing housewarming parties, painting nursery walls, only to learn your castle is built on sand. That's exactly what was about to happen. When I finally walked into the courtroom and unrolled that deed, the silence in the room was louder than any screaming Karen could muster. Their empire was never theirs. It was mine. And the best part? I let them finish every last house before I said a single word. They thought they owned paradise. They didn't realize they'd built it on borrowed ground. My name is Lucas Grant, 48 years old, a quiet man by nature, the kind who prefers pine trees over people, and the sound of wind against the window more than any dinner party. I never thought I'd be telling a story like this. Not about lawsuits, not about HOAs, and definitely not about losing the very ground my grandfather built our lives on. The land sits at the edge of the Front Range. 47 acres of rolling hills, evergreens, and the kind of view that could silence your mind for hours. My grandfather bought it in 1948 for next to nothing, just raw Colorado wilderness. He cleared the first trails with a hand axe, raised cattle for decades, and passed it down like a promise. My father turned part of it into an orchard. Apples, pears, a few peach trees that never quite liked the altitude but grew anyway. When I inherited it, the deed wasn't just paper. It was my family's entire history pressed into parchment and ink. I built a small timber frame home on the ridge. Not for show, not for status, just home. Every window pointed towards something green, something real. Mornings were slow and easy. Coffee steaming on the porch, coyotes calling in the distance, wind carving paths through tall grass. I thought I was far away from everything that could cause trouble. But paradise has neighbors, and neighbors bring rules. About 5 years back, a developer bought the land that bordered mine. They called it Silver Valley Estates. First came the surveyors, then the bright orange stakes, then the buzz of heavy machinery. A neighborhood rose like weeds, shiny roofs, vinyl fences, perfect sidewalks, and with it, an HOA. Big letters on signs at the entrance, community standards enforced. At first, it didn't bother me. Their world was theirs, mine was mine. The property line was clearly marked, and I stayed out of their little suburban theater. But HOAs have a way of spilling past their borders. I noticed the first hint on a quiet autumn morning. A white Tesla crawled down the dirt road that leads to my gate. It didn't belong there. It slowed just long enough for the woman inside, blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, pearl earrings, to stare at my fence like it offended her. She scribbled something on a clipboard, turned around, and drove off. I didn't know it then, but that was HOA President Karen McAllister, the self-proclaimed guardian of community aesthetics. Over the next few months, more small things started happening. Letters, not official county mail, just neatly printed envelopes with HOA logos. Community standards reminder, one said. Another, property appearance expectations. My property wasn't part of their subdivision. I wasn't under their rules. but they acted like their lines extended wherever their eyes could see. I laughed it off at first. I tossed the letters into a kitchen drawer and forgot about them. My land was mine. The old deed, the original surveys, the boundary markers. All rock solid. Or so I thought. The neighborhood kept growing. One cul-de-sac turned into 3. Then came the fancy clubhouse. Then the private security patrols. On weekends, they'd host community brunches, and I'd see rows of matching lawn chairs set up at the edge of my property. Always the same woman at the center of it, Karen. Barking orders, pointing, commanding. I could feel her eyes on my land even when I wasn't looking. Then came the construction noises. Louder, closer. At first, just distant hammering. Then concrete mixers. Then trucks pulling up to the old dirt service road that belonged to my family for generations. I walked down one afternoon, coffee mug in hand, just to see how far they'd stretched. That's when I saw it. Fresh survey flags, bright pink and yellow, and they weren't on their side of the fence anymore. I remember the feeling like it was yesterday, a mix of confusion and a sharp, cold ripple down my spine. The kind of feeling that tells you something's shifting beneath your feet. Something big. Something silent. I followed the flags with my eyes. They formed neat, perfect lines. Exactly the kind of precision developers use when they think they own the land they're standing on. That night, I dug out the old family deed from the fireproof safe under my bed. The parchment was fragile, browned at the edges, but it was still clear as the day it was signed. 47 acres. Coordinates, boundaries, original surveyor signatures. It was unshakable proof, or so I believed. A week later, I found heavy machinery parked at the edge of my pasture. They were prepping to pour concrete. On my side, not inches over. Yards. And when I walked up to confront them, the foreman handed me a glossy blueprint. Silver Valley Expansion, Phase 2. According to their plans, a row of luxury homes would soon be standing exactly where my grandfather used to graze cattle. He said it with the confidence of someone who truly believed he had the right. I didn't know it yet, but that confidence came from somewhere deeper. Permits, deals, and signatures made behind closed doors. While I was sipping coffee on my porch, the HOA and its developers had been quietly drawing new lines on paper. Lines that sliced straight through my family's legacy. But I wasn't just some old guy clinging to land. I knew my boundaries. I had proof. And that's why the next envelope felt so surreal. Notice of Development Integration. HOA letterhead. A claim that my land was scheduled for annexation into their community. As if my inheritance was just some patch of dirt they could color in on a map. That was the moment the quiet mornings ended. That was when Karen McAllister's little HOA world collided with mine, and something told me she wasn't the kind of woman who backed down easily. The first time I noticed the bulldozers, it was a Tuesday morning. I remember because the mist was still hanging low over the pasture, and the air carried that sharp, crisp cold that only happens in late fall. My property line was clear, always had been, fenced, staked, surveyed. But there they were, yellow machines, parked like they owned the place, their treads chewing into ground that hadn't been touched by anything except cattle hooves and tractor tires for decades. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some kind of surveying misread. But then came the men in hard hats, unrolling blueprints on my fence post like they were standing on their own site. Concrete forms, foundation lines, everything already mapped out. 96 homes, a clubhouse, and a pool, right through the center of my land. I marched down there still wearing the old flannel I used for chores, boots muddy from morning dew. "This is private property," I said. The foreman didn't even look up. He tapped the blueprint with his pen, grinned, and said, "Not anymore." That sentence burned into my brain like it was etched in fire. That same day, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. HOA letterhead, integration and compliance expectations. The tone was casual, as if this was already decided. A schedule of inspections, landscaping standards, fines for non-compliance. Non-compliance with rules I'd never agreed to, by an HOA I wasn't a part of. I called the number on the letter, straight to voicemail. I showed up at their office, a prefab trailer at the entrance of Silver Valley. They wouldn't let me pass the lobby. "Talk to legal," they said, sliding me a business card with a smug little smile. Within a week, the construction pushed deeper into my pasture. Wooden stakes marked driveways. Survey crews drilled posts in my orchard. And every time I confronted them, the same response. They waved papers I wasn't allowed to see and told me to call their lawyer. It was like being erased from my own land in real time. Then came Karen. She showed up in that same white Tesla, stepping out like she was stepping onto a stage. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, voice sharp enough to cut through steel. She called it progress. She said, "We're building a community. You should be proud." Proud? As if I'd volunteered to be annexed. She started with little things, like a predator testing the edges of a cage. Anonymous complaints to the county, noise violations because my old tractor was unsightly, trash ordinance citations, because a pile of firewood near my barn blocked the view of the community. She sent inspectors to my property who weren't even city officials, just HOA. Volunteers in matching windbreakers with fake badges. And when I didn't bow, she turned up the pressure. The letters piled up. Certified mail. Notices. Legal-sounding threats about eminent domain and community jurisdiction. Each one colder than the last. It wasn't just harassment. It was psychological warfare dressed up in legalese. Every envelope felt heavier, like a slow tightening of a rope I hadn't noticed was already around my neck. I went to the county clerk's office, waited for hours. When they finally pulled the records, what I saw didn't make sense. Parcels carved up on paper, new boundary lines slicing through mine like it was never there. A subdivision expansion plan stamped and approved. But here's the thing, nobody ever asked me to sign. Nobody ever notified me of a sale. On paper, it looked like I'd just disappeared. The next week, I got a notice of violation, not from the county, but from the HOA itself. A $500 fine for unapproved exterior structure. The structure was my barn, built in 1964. They followed that with another, failure to comply with HOA appearance standards. Apparently, my wild grass didn't match their turf specifications. I wasn't alone. I started hearing whispers from people on the edge of the subdivision. A neighbor named Dolores got fined for keeping a tomato garden that wasn't in raised beds. An elderly couple got a notice because their porch swing was the wrong shade of brown. One man was threatened with foreclosure for having a pickup truck in his driveway. They called it community beautification. But it was control, pure and simple. That's when I realized what Karen really was. Not just a busybody, but the kind of person who builds power like a fortress, rule by rule, line by line, letter by letter. I tried fighting back through official channels, filed complaints, called City Hall, talked to surveyors. Everyone passed the buck. The HOA had friends in the right places. A board member was on the zoning committee. Another's brother worked at the county recorder's office. Every door I knocked on opened just wide enough to show me they'd already picked a side. And it wasn't mine. One night, I woke up to the sound of engines. Bright construction lights flooded the orchard. They were digging, on my land. I grabbed my flashlight, stormed down the hill, and saw foundation frames already going in. My barn was practically glowing under the work lamps. When I shouted at them, they just laughed and told me to call Karen. The helplessness hit like a physical blow. This wasn't just losing property. This was watching strangers tear through my family's history while pretending it didn't belong to me. And worse, nobody cared. I was invisible. I started documenting everything. Dates, times, photos of every inch they crossed, drone footage, copies of every letter. But Karen escalated faster than I could keep up. HOA patrols started cruising by at night. One of their private security guards, off-duty cops with shiny badges, parked at my gate for hours. just staring at my house like it was already part of their kingdom. Then came the community meeting. I wasn't invited, but one of the neighbors, a single mom who was sick of the HOA too, slipped me the flyer. Inside the clubhouse, Karen was parading blueprints and promising Phase 2 completion by fall. She talked about amenities, home values, landscaping. Not once did she mention the name Grant. Not once did she acknowledge that the heart of Phase 2 was someone else's land. But buried in those plans, I saw it. A small handwritten note in the corner. Replat filed. Deed pending. Deed pending. My stomach dropped. That's when I knew this wasn't an accident. This was a full-on land grab. I went home that night, dug into the old safe, and pulled out the family deed again. The original, notarized, recorded before most of the HOA board was even born. I laid it out on the table next to their glossy HOA map. The lines didn't just overlap. Their entire expansion sat squarely on what my grandfather left me. And for the first time in weeks, the fear cracked, replaced by something colder. Determination. Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought paperwork and signatures could erase generations. But she didn't know what I had in that old safe. She didn't know that buried beneath all her new lines, the real line was drawn decades before she ever showed up. The bulldozers kept rolling, but I'd found the weapon she didn't see coming. The original deed. It all came to a head on a bright, brittle morning that smelled like rain. The HOA had called a special emergency meeting at the courthouse. They thought it was their victory lap. 96 homes stood nearly finished. A playground had gone in last week. Sprinkler systems, fences, freshly rolled sod. It looked like a kingdom carved in concrete. Karen walked into that courtroom like she owned the ground beneath it. Red suit, perfect hair. Her little army of board members filed in behind her, clutching binders and whispering to one another. The developers were there too, polished suits, confident smirks. I could feel their arrogance before they even opened their mouths. They had the gall to act like I was the intruder, like I was trespassing on my own land. I sat alone on the right side of the gallery. No team, no suit. Just me, a weathered man in work boots with a single leather satchel at my feet. Inside that satchel was everything they had pretended didn't exist. The hearing began fast. Their attorney, slick, smooth, expensive, spoke in rehearsed paragraphs about community advancement, annexation agreements, and public benefit. He painted me like an obstructionist. Mr. Grant's claims are based on outdated filings, he said with a half-smile. All legal transfers have been finalized. Every word was a nail they thought they were hammering into a coffin. Karen's face was a mask of victory. She nodded with every sentence like a queen listening to her loyal knight. When it was my turn, I didn't give them a speech. I didn't have to. I pulled out the original deed, the real one, signed in 1948, authenticated, filed, and recorded long before this HOA ever existed. And I slid it onto the table. The sound of that paper hitting the wood was louder than any gavel. The county clerk leaned forward, eyes narrowing as they examined the seal. The judge adjusted her glasses. You could feel the air shift. The HOA attorney's voice faltered mid-sentence. Karen blinked once, then twice, like someone had just flipped the script on a play she'd already planned the ending for. I spoke slowly, deliberately. This is the original deed to the 47 acres of land you built your subdivision on. Not 1 square inch was ever sold, transferred, or annexed. Your entire development is on my property. Then silence, real silence, not the polite kind, the kind that fills a room like a weight. The clerk confirmed the record. The judge looked up and said the words that cracked their empire wide open. This deed predates every filing associated with the HOA's expansion. Karen's lawyer tried to object. His voice was shaky now, the silk stripped off. He fumbled for loopholes, permits, agreements. But the judge kept repeating it like a hammer. This land was never theirs to build on. One of the developers went pale. Another whispered something sharp, and papers shuffled like falling leaves. Someone in the back audibly gasped when the county title record flashed on the overhead screen, matching every inch of the subdivision to my family's parcel. Karen stood up. She tried to talk over the judge. "This is a misunderstanding," she snapped. "We've invested millions. The community is built on property that doesn't belong to you." The judge cut in. It was over. In an instant, the room turned into a storm. Developers shouted. Lawyers scrambled. Homeowners in the gallery pulled out their phones, some already recording, some realizing they'd just bought homes built on land that was never for sale. HOA board members whispered frantically, their faces draining of color. Karen didn't move. Her hands clenched the back of her chair. For someone who'd spent years controlling everyone else's lives, she suddenly looked very, very small. The judge issued an immediate injunction on all development activity. Every permit, every agreement tied to the expansion was suspended pending legal resolution. Translation: their empire just collapsed in real time. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I just stood there, hands steady, heart hammering in my chest like a war drum. Months of helplessness boiled down to this one quiet moment, the sound of their power cracking. And as deputies escorted the developers into a separate room for questioning, Karen finally turned to me. Her voice, usually sharp and unshakable, was barely a whisper. "You can't do this," she said. "But here's the truth. I didn't do anything. They did. They built a kingdom on stolen ground. I just brought the deed." When the judge's gavel finally came down, everything they'd built started to unravel. Fast. The injunction froze construction before the final layer of asphalt could be poured. Contractors packed up. Developers vanished behind lawyers. Homeowners who had moved in just weeks earlier were left staring at their dream homes with a new kind of fear in their eyes. They didn't actually own the ground under their feet. Within a month, the county invalidated the fraudulent filings tied to the HOA's expansion. Every permit, every subdivision map, every plat filed under Silver Valley Phase 2 was wiped clean. What was left was the same 47 acres my grandfather once stood on, with a hand axe and a dream. Mine again, officially, legally, untouchably. Karen's kingdom crumbled piece by piece. The HOA board, once so loud, so smug, stopped showing up to meetings. The developers were hit with a wave of lawsuits from angry homeowners who'd bought property on stolen land. Class action attorneys got involved. News trucks rolled up to the once-perfect subdivision entrance, broadcasting their story to anyone who would listen. HOA corruption doesn't stay quiet when 96 families are suddenly caught in the middle. And Karen, she faced the kind of accountability she never thought she would. Fraud. Misrepresentation. Civil claims stacked higher than her own ego. The same woman who once barked orders at neighbors about mailbox, heights and fence colors now sat in depositions, while attorneys tore apart her community. Leadership. The HOA she built didn't just dissolve. It disintegrated in public. But the real shift wasn't just legal. It was human. The neighbors, those who once whispered about her rules but felt too powerless to resist, started talking to each other in a way they never had before. No more mandatory HOA patrols. No more fines for porch lights left on too long. Instead, they planted gardens where Karen's little signs used to stand. Kids played in yards without someone writing them up for it. The fear lifted. A few of the families reached out to me personally. They apologized, even though they weren't the ones who'd filed fraudulent deeds or harassed me with fake violations. "We thought the HOA was protecting us," one of them said. "We didn't realize it was stealing from you. I didn't hold it against them. They were caught in a machine they didn't build. But together, we turned that machine off. It took months to settle everything. Lawsuits, clean title transfers, court orders. It wasn't glamorous or easy. But each ruling that came down was another reminder that standing your ground isn't just a metaphor. It's a fight. And sometimes it's a long one. The land is quiet again now. The orchard has grown over where they tore up the soil. The pasture is mine in name and in law. I rebuilt the fence, not to keep people out, but to remind myself where the line is. Where it's always been, Karen moved away. I heard through the grapevine that she sold her house at a loss. The HOA no longer exists. The big sign at the entrance was pulled down months ago. In its place, someone put up a hand-painted wooden one. Silver Valley. A community, not a corporation. I walk the ridge sometimes at sunset, the same spot where I first saw those survey flags flapping in the wind. Back then, it felt like I was being swallowed whole. Now, it feels like the ground itself is breathing again. This whole thing wasn't just about property lines. It was about power, who holds it, and what happens when someone decides to take it back. HOAs like Karen's thrive on fear. They rely on people staying quiet, believing that a stamp and a signature can erase history. But the thing about history is, it doesn't disappear. Not if you fight for it. I didn't win because I had more money. I didn't win because I had a team of lawyers. I won because the truth was on paper, waiting for the right moment to be read aloud. And when it was, everything else collapsed. So if you're listening to this, and you've ever felt like someone's trying to take what's yours, your home, your voice, your rights, remember, power doesn't always come from the loudest person in the room. Sometimes it comes from the quiet one holding the deed. What would you do if an entire HOA built an empire on your land?